It's the start of 2017 and I just bought an E46 all-wheel drive. And upon driving home, the check engine light came on. Due to the winter season approaching, time is of the essence for the 100-mile daily commute.
So stay with us as this video is going to be about diagnosing the drivetrain malfunction on the E46. Now whatever numbnut took down the exhaust is a real retard, because this vacuum line is supposed to go over there. Little exhaust flap that covers. We're going to start by removing the microfilter and tray. Since the DME had fuel trim faults, mixture too lean stored in fault memory, we're going to start by using a special machine that produces smoke, and then directing the smoke into the valve cover, which smoke will flow through the entire engine, the crankcase ventilation hoses, and the entire intake manifold, to visually see if we have a vacuum leak. Now that's a hot air intake, alright. Yep. Corporate right there. The smoke that is coming out of the port plugs that are behind the intake manifold visually indicate a strong vacuum leak. Meanwhile, the smoke machine is still pumping that smoke, so continued inspecting the PVC crankcase hoses, the secondary air valve vacuum line, and the valve cover itself for any visual leaks. To have more access, checking and replacing vacuum port plugs and lines, we start by removing the valve cover trim and intake manifold trim. Also removing and checking the inside part of the PVC hose for any visual mayonnaise buildup which was not found, indicating that the PVC and the hoses were recently replaced. No, it looks okay. It's not filled with any kind of creamy stuff. Normal for the time being. Makes sense. Also checking the intake runner hose if replaced or damaged. Using a mirror, inspecting the vacuum port plugs and the vacuum lines at the rear of the intake manifold, which have a visual of the vacuum plugs cracking and the vacuum lines dry rotting and deteriorating, which are the vacuum lines used to control the secondary air valve and the rear muffler exhaust flap. Installing one of the new vacuum plugs onto the port of the intake manifold, which they are different sizes and may have 2 to 3 ports behind the manifold. Removing the intake and intake boots to inspect one of the vacuum lines that lead to the muffler exhaust flap. Usually it likes to break around here. You know, that looks okay. That thing is what I'm curious about. That little black dome thing here. Yeah, that's for the exhaust.
Okay, I see
It could be a freaking rip in this line here. All these lines are fucking cooked. That's the thing. Yeah. I don't know if it snapped or what, but you see this?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Like, look how easy it is to... Look at it. It's like turning into dirt. Replacing all the worn vacuum lines with an updated nylon braided hose, which are the same lines used on the newer E90 N54 vacuum reservoirs that control the turbo wastegate, which are meant to handle extreme heat. Fix this guy for the secondary air valve. This thing is like baked on. These updated vacuum lines on the E46 will probably last a lifetime on the engine before it completely falls apart. After all the vacuum lines were replaced, I performed another smoke test on the engine to make sure nothing is leaking. See, I don't see the smoke coming out of the dipstick area. I don't see it coming out anywhere other than that. That's traveling. One useful tool the shop got for this smoke machine way after this E46 had all of its problems resolved, this inflatable tube gets inserted into the intake tube, which seals and pressurizes most of the engine with smoke to help identify leaks more effectively. Another quick item we replaced before clearing faults was replacing the gas cap, because the old one has all cracks around the seal and can also trigger the check engine light. But now after the engine has no vacuum leaks, gave the car 2 days of driving, check engine light comes back on. With the same lean mixture fault present again, maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to change out the 15-year-old fuel filter since the car did a lot of sitting over the years. These lines are like falling on it. Since the hoses adhere to the ports on the fuel filter, try prying enough to spray lubricant inside the hose so it can be removed without damaging the fuel hose. I can't even barely turned it with yeah. In that case, replaced all hose clamps for the fuel filter. The new MAN fuel filter being installed, which was purchased aftermarket, is the same OEM product BMW uses, except not wrapped in a fancy white BMW box. Yep. Just age. Really? After that, the hose clamps were tightened down enough that it wouldn't twist on the fuel filter ports. Only part being reused is the rubber sleeve around the fuel filter for the bracket holder. Before the fuel filter was installed, replace the rubber vacuum line going into the fuel filter regulator. After repairs made, started the vehicle with wide open throttle until the fuel reached into the engine enough that it can idle smooth on its own. While the vehicle was running, check all filter connections to make sure of no leaks. Use silver anti-seize on the body studs so in the next service, the cover bolts won't rust on and will remove easy. After the fuel filter installation was finished, wanted to make sure the fuel rail pressure is on spec and that the fuel pump is working normal. There is a Schrader valve, almost like a tire valve stem connection, on the fuel rail itself that a fuel pressure gauge can connect very easy to. I got and start it. With the engine running, 50 psi of fuel pressure for an M54 engine is on specification. Give it some gas. Let's see if it A little more. A little more. Shut it off. Later on, after all the repairs and all the maintenance was done, we changed the fuel pump anyway, because Mushu's going to be driving the E46 100 miles a day in the state of Pennsylvania, and he don't want to end up stalling out in the middle of the country with no cell phone service. After a few days, and after those repairs, one thing that you don't say out loud, or thinking to yourself while driving the ultimate driving machine you just fixed, is saying anything negative or saying that it's finally fixed. Because the amount of computer modules that are in a BMW are so powerful, it can read your mind and tell you to go f*** yourself. So after that, Casey on his own decided to look up information on the E46 forums, and what was left that we didn't do before was to replace the mass airflow sensor. But before we replaced the mass airflow sensor, we thought it'd be best to remove the hot air intake and replace it back to an OEM intake box setup. Without knowing at the time, Casey purchased a 330 Sulev intake box for $60 off of eBay.
Every single one I've seen on sale.
The intake diameter of the Sulev 330 box was larger than the 325 box, leaving a 1/4-inch space diameter around the mass airflow sensor, so it does not fit. A second attempt of the OEM intake box was purchased for an additional $20 off of Craigslist, which ended up being for another 330 setup, which resulted with the same problem.
Otherwise, you're gonna have to get the whole top piece.
Get that top piece again.
But behind that smile, Casey was fed up and furious of wasting money on going back to an OEM setup. So, with a little time and research, Casey found a K&N air filter kit, which I told him about, one which I've installed on a 330 Ci back in high school. The idea of what this actually makes this a functional cold air intake is the metal shield right there. This metal shield deflects heat from the engine and heat being blown from the radiator, so that the tubular performance filter element is only sucking the cold air that is coming from the kidney grill air duct and the gap that is between the left headlight, just like the OEM setup.
They actually made this piping out of this material.
I have it in my car.
You do?
I have a complete elbow.
Silicone?
Yes, complete silicone elbow. I deleted my traction control. So straight off my throttle body, off my intake, wrap around to cone.
Push!
It's like pregnancy.
Push!
Oh, we going? Maybe. Just keep screwing. Dang.
What the fuck?
Yeah, I need a break from my truck anyway.
Super tight.
Put the loop a long way. It's a 7. Yeah, I think you're already off. She's already started to like birth herself off. She's on crooked. Get a light in there. Oh. Yeah, there we go. See the bottom. Oh. There you go. Oh, there it is.
Perfect.
Can you feel that? Is it tilted the right way?
I'm
Snug it for now so it doesn't, yeah. So that's the one thing, if you leave too much lube on there and just let it sit, it just like, and just pops right off the compartment again. I'm like, I just wrestled with that for 10 minutes. Yeah, see, like that, yeah, that cone's probably gotta be, Jesus Christ, it's a big cone.
It just fits.
So maybe give her like maybe a couple degrees down. You got some room south of here. That will get you.
Wow.
That's a little bit. Yeah, that works a little better. Now you're at least
There in the hood.
yeah.
Alright.
Yeah, she's good. It can turn slightly, so any vibration.
It was starting to rip. It's not ripped through.
Oh.
I just put that just to kind of support it.
I think I should go with the silicone one.
Just got tired of buying Sulev boxes.
Yeah, fucking Sulev boxes. Pissed me off.
Yeah, nice. I heard you got Sulev.
Well, I got Sulev, I got a 330 box, and then that didn't work either, so...
So after the mass airflow sensor was replaced and the cold air intake was installed, appeared default memory, and finally, this time, the check engine light never came back on. Thus, with this K&N installation, the E46 is now breathing in more cold air with some slight engine/whoosh noise that everybody that does these types of installs wants to hear. Now that we fixed the drivetrain malfunction, stay tuned as we defy BMW's lifetime fluid recommendations in Chapter 3.